Welcome to Cryptic Accounts, the podcast by paranoid people for paranoid people. And this week on the show, we have The Gateway Experience, Escaping Time and Space with the CIA. I'm your host for the week, Dennis Cheney, joined, as always, by Patrick Ryan. How are you doing, Patrick?
Ready for a bonus episode.
It's a bonus. We might
It
just
is.
start doing this more often. It might, sooner or later, it might just not be a bonus
No,
anymore.
let's just tell them it's a bonus. That way they don't expect it.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, don't expect this every Friday, and if it happens, it happens. But I've been wanting to do this, but I've been trying to work my way through Genesis Revisited, which I've worked very hard on that. Please go back and listen to those 2 episodes. We have a third one coming up next week, but I've wanted to do this while it's in the news, and so we are doing the Gateway Experience this week.
Okay.
On a Cryptic Casual Friday.
I like that. The Cryptic Casual Friday.
Yeah. Are you at all familiar with this?
I don't think so.
Okay, well then you get to start fresh.
Yeah, I was gonna say as we get into it, a lot of times you'll ask me, and then until we really start getting into it, like it doesn't ring any bells. So we'll see.
You'll be aware this involves remote viewing.
Okay, then I may be aware of it already then.
Yeah, well, it involves some shows you've done in the past too. So.
Oh, then yeah, I probably will be. But no,
But
what you've said so far doesn't ring any bells as far as the title or whatever.
Okay, so let's just jump right in. So this actually comes from, well, this doesn't come from, but I became aware of this from an article on Vice's motherboard section, which is like a technology section of Vice. And it's an article by Toby Campion that was published on February 16th, 2021. And it's entitled, How to Escape the Confines of Time and Space According to the CIA.
That's a bold title.
It's a bold title, but
also not who to expect to hear explain escaping the confinements of time and space. Your buddies at the CIA.
I had the realization this last week that you know how throughout history, you know how like King Arthur had Merlin and the Egyptian pharaoh had his magicians and different kings have like their fortune tellers and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the CIA is for our government.
You know what? That's a really good comparison, and I can totally see that. They are like the wizards.
Yeah, them and the military intelligence. They're like the thing that's always existed. Like there's always been like a king and a prophet. You know what I mean? Like they're like the prophet to our elected leaders, pretty much in certain ways. And this one will definitely, it kind of clicked when I was doing this research. Now this actually started, or the author at Vice became aware of this because apparently this has been trending on TikTok of all places.
Oh, okay.
Which is an app
that app has been moving the needle in lots of weird ways, like as far as like social movements and stuff. Like,
yeah, and this is one of the weirder ones. I don't have TikTok. I don't want to have TikTok. I know that you do short little videos on it. It's kind of like Vine used to be, but I don't know. But some way or another, this declassified 1983 CIA report has been like making the rounds on TikTok.
That is, I don't even really know how to process the sentence that you just gave me, Dennis. I really don't.
Yeah, welcome to the post-history world that we live in where nothing makes any sense.
Welcome to 2020, the sequel. That's what's happening here.
Yeah, we're just beyond it. Like 2020 was actually the end of the world. Now we're just in nonsense land. This started on TikTok. I'm way too old to understand any of that. So users of this app are sharing a classified 1983 CIA report on something called the Gateway Experience. And it is basically a remote viewing method plus a whole lot more that we're going to get into.
So this is like another thing that was going on parallel to some of the stuff like the mission to Mars and stuff that I've covered.
That was Project Stargate. And this actually, I believe, was a method. The Gateway Experience is a method that was used in that project.
Okay.
So this is like the how. And I guess there's a lot of hows, but this is one that apparently worked very well and was used to like find. So anyway,
I'm a little surprised that I didn't come across this part when I was looking into the stuff I was looking into with remote viewing.
And for you, I remember saying during your remote viewing episodes that I wanted to learn how to do this. For anyone who wants to learn how to do this, we're going to get into that this episode.
Are you about to teach me how to remote view, Dennis?
This will not be a tutorial, but you're going to find resources. You could start with the CIA report and you could work from there. We're going to have resources also in the links if you want to take classes. But
man, where is this show going to be in like 2 years?
Yeah, I know we've already moved so far. So we're going to actually in this episode go through the report itself. I went through this CIA military intelligence report myself. I'm going to do my own summary, but Campion at Vice provided kind of a nice brief timeline to get into how this all started historically. So between 1953 and 1956, there was a radio broadcasting executive named Robert Monroe, who had found that certain sound patterns and frequencies could alter human capabilities. Now, Robert Monroe took this knowledge from his own kind of, he was this executive, he ran this radio business, and he was like also doing experiments on the side. And so he found that like different tones and stuff could like affect the way people think and much more. So he started like a research and development department like inside of his radio company dedicated exclusively to this.
Okay.
So I was like, okay, I didn't really get enough from the Vice article, so I jumped off. So Robert Monroe was obviously a business executive. He ran radio companies. He ran a cable company at one point. He was active, throughout the latter part of the last century. He even was like big into producing cassette tapes when that was a big thing. So he was like a rich dude. But his true love was consciousness research. And he was obsessed. This whole thing started because he wanted to figure out a way for people to learn in their sleep. So he started using radio waves and different sound frequencies to try to mess with his brain to allow him to basically learn while he was asleep. And then something strange happened. He started having out-of-body experiences.
Whoa.
And this just like jump started everything. So he founded eventually what's called the Monroe Institute, which is in Charlottesville, Virginia. It's a nonprofit. It's still around today. It's estimated that 20,000 people have attended this institute, including people from the CIA. And he authored a very famous book that we might have to cover sometime in 1971 called Journeys Out of the Body. And then he did follow-ups in the 80s and 90s. He's basically considered the dude who popularized the idea of the out-of-body experience.
Okay.
Or an OBE. So here's what he thought was happening. Here's how he thinks this is working. He believed that you could use sound waves to entrain brain waves. And entrainment is a biological process where some part of your biological clock is reset or set based on some outside stimuli. So basically, he believed you could use sound to train your brain to like kind of mimic those sounds and therefore like control your brain with sounds, basically.
Okay.
Now, have you ever heard of the term binaural beats?
No.
So on YouTube, you can run into these. There'll be these soundtracks that are like binaural beats. There's also like an artist named Binaural Beats, but you can find these YouTube videos and that are basically just like these very deep or like weirdly almost audible sounds. And this is something that he pioneered basically through the use of headphones. And binaural just means two ears. So here's how it works. Basically, you wear headphones, you play certain sound waves in one, certain sound waves in the other. And the theory is that your brain responds to these two different waves by producing its own kind of third sound in response.
Okay.
And when this happens, he calls it hemispherical synchronization or hemisync, or you could also call it brainwave synchronization. And the reason this is important, and this led me down a bit of a rabbit hole, and I found this like really great NPR article, and I've been into this in a while, but this NPR article kind of summarized studies on this, and I'm providing that in the show notes as well. Our brain has two hemispheres, left brain, right brain, right?
Yeah.
And they process things basically largely independently. So there's this whole idea that there's like left brain people and right brain people.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily true, and it kind of misses the point. So the studies have shown that basically the two hemispheres of your brain process differently, and this even goes as far as assigning different levels of importance to different things, having different preferences for different things. It's kind of like you have two people a little bit inside of you. And scientists have known about this for a while, and it's called hemispheric asymmetries. So, for example, they did experiments on patients who had what's called the corpus callosum cut in their brain. And that's the fiber system that connects the right and left hemispheres. It's just right in the middle of your brain. And its job is to basically let these two brains communicate with each other.
Okay.
So you would think that cutting that would like really mess somebody up.
Yeah.
like maybe you wouldn't be able to live. But the weird thing is you can cut it and people can just keep going on pretty much like normal. These two sides are like independently functioning. Now, so believe it or not,
still work together even when they're not connected and able to communicate with each other.
Well, we'll get into this corpus callosum part of your brain allows them to communicate. Okay. So I included a video of a man, and there's a few of these videos out there, who had surgery that cut this part of his brain, just completely cut the two halves of the brain apart as a treatment for epilepsy. And they had him do some like extremely fascinating experiments. So like, for example, so you might not know, but like your left brain controls the right side of your body and vice versa. Mm-hmm. The left side of your brain, which is why most people write and use stuff with their left hand, because the left brain is the side that does like language and logic and stuff. Mm-hmm. And the right side of your brain is the opposite. So they had him do this experiment where they basically had him look at the center of a computer screen, and they would flash a word on the right side of the computer screen, like cat. And then they'd ask him to identify what the word was. And so since his right eye is controlled by the left part of his brain, the left part is the part that can read. So he'd see the word cat and he'd say cat. Okay. Then they show him a picture on the right side of a cat, and he'd be like, that's a cat, because the left brain can do both. But the right side of the brain, however, if they put a picture of the cat on the left side, which is being interpreted by the right side of his brain, he'd be able to identify the picture. He'd say, that's a cat. But if they showed the word cat, he didn't see the word.
Really?
Because the right side of our brain does not know language.
So that's just, it's hard to even get your head around like what that would be like to see a word and not know the word.
And in fact, I'm not even sure if he sees it.
Well, he's got to be able to see it. It's there. Like, unless there's some vision problem, it's still going to look like shapes and colors.
Yeah, that's probably correct.
But it's not going to recognize what that is, or even are those letters. It might be like when we look at like hieroglyphs or something.
Yeah, he just in the video, he's completely like, I don't see what you're trying to ask me. But here's the even weirder thing. So if they show him a word like cat on the left side, so his right brain doesn't recognize it as a word. But when they say, okay, all right, we get it, you couldn't read it, they'll ask him, they'll say, close your eyes, take your left hand, which is controlled by the right side of the brain, and draw what you saw. And he could draw a cat. And then he could look at his own drawing, and his brain would say, oh, his left brain could look at it and say, oh, okay, that's a cat. So he'd say, I must have saw the word cat.
He would write the word?
No.
I thought the right brain could see the picture but couldn't see the word.
Right. So his right brain saw the word cat. His left brain didn't because it was just in one eye.
Yeah.
So he's like, I don't see a word. But then they're like, okay, well, you didn't see a word. Close your eyes, draw what you saw. He'll draw a picture of a cat, and then he'll look at it with both eyes, and his left brain will be like, oh, well, that's a picture of a cat. So then he's like, oh, I must have seen the word cat. So it just shows you like how both sides do different functions, and
Oh,
it's
so
weird.
he'd see the word and he'd still draw a picture. That's what you're saying.
He saw the word, didn't know what word he saw.
He didn't know the
And
word,
then
but then he would draw a picture, not the word. He would draw a picture of a cat. That's even weirder.
It's bizarre.
That's even weirder.
And this would be anyone if they had the surgery. This is just the way the human brain works. And there's other videos out there where they like there's this woman, I couldn't find it to include here, but I've seen it in the past, where they cut her, they asked her, for instance, to pick out an outfit that she wanted to wear for the interview, and her right hand went for like a red dress and her left hand went for like a purple dress. Like she had like two different preferences because both brains were like operating like at the same time.
Weird.
Okay. So this is a weird thing about the human brain. So Monroe thought that if you could somehow sync up the two hemispheres of the brain using these beats, then you could like basically have like superpowers.
Okay.
Now, in the public world, this process of using these sounds has had like mixed results. Some people do report that it helps them with learning or relaxation or even altered states of consciousness. I found it interesting. There was actually a study in 1999 where they did surgery on people and they tested these sound waves as a replacement for fentanyl, which is like an extremely powerful anesthesia agent, and it actually kind of worked. It was a good partial replacement for fentanyl.
Really?
Yeah, so you could operate on someone just using like sound waves to put them out.
Well, so far this sounds like something I'm trying later tonight.
Oh yeah, yeah. Now you probably have to have like amazing headphones. I don't
do have
know,
some
but
pretty good headphones.
yeah, I'm gonna definitely start to get into this, I think. So let's get back to Campion's timeline of this whole gateway experience. So in 1972, there was a classified report that began circulating in American intelligence circles that the Soviets were spending a bunch of money on ESP and like psychokinesis research. So in 1975, Monroe started patenting his techniques and equipment for this Hemisink, we'll call it. So between 1978 and 1984, that's when Project Stargate was going on. And we've covered that in the past in the remote viewing Mars, etc. So go back and listen to that if you're interested. So what we learned in 1983 is when this report that we're going to get into was published, and it goes into basically the military intelligence investigation of like how Monroe's techniques might actually work to help you remote view. And it goes way beyond that. And it's called the gateway process. So finally, these documents were declassified in 2003, and more of them were declassified in 2017. And I've included here a picture that just kind of explains the different hemispheres of the brain. So the left one is analytical. It does perception. It's ordered. It's rational thought. It does verbal things. It does math, science, logic, words, writing, and the right side of the body. The left side does intuition, or no, I'm sorry, the right side does intuition, holistic perception, random sequencing, emotional thought, adventurous, impulse, creativity. The right side is kind of like this big uncontrolled ocean, is what we're basically going to discover. And the left side is like the boss, kind of. The left side, more or less, if we were just our right brain, I remember once, and maybe I'll give it to you for the show notes. There is a great TED talk of a woman who had a stroke that eventually that she was at the gym and she had a stroke that essentially made her perceive only through her right brain. And she described it as like the whole world becoming like there weren't even individual objects. Everything was just like one part of one thing. The right brain is like this crazy emotional expanse, and like we need our left brain basically to be able to look at something and name it and like keep things compartmentalized so that we're
It's
not just
raining
like
in the right side of the brain.
it's raining in the right side of the brain big time.
It's like,
So
calm down, let's label some of this stuff, like, and the right brain's just like, oh my God, everything.
yes, yeah, it's like everything all at once. I am part of the universe. It's and like so that, but that we know scientifically is kind of the start to the basis of the gateway experience. So are you ready to get into this report? Because I said off with the wire, we're doing it. Okay. So we start. This is written by a man named Wayne M. McConnell, who I've included a picture of him here. He's a real guy. He was U.S. Army intelligence. Obviously, this was in 1983. And immediately when you read the introduction, he has this introductory letter, and I just had to include a portion of it because it's like he's letting his boss know. He's writing this report for his boss, who's basically asked him to look into this and be like, is this a real thing? Is this Hemisink thing, like, is this real? Can it be used? And he's saying like, yes, it has, but like, you're gonna think I'm crazy unless I explain a few things to you first. He's gotten like, if you've ever had it, like, this guy's like my new saint, because like, if you've ever had a boss give you something that you think is impossible, this guy's boss literally asked him to figure out if you can escape time and space, and he just went to work on it. He's like, all right, boss, I'll get the report on your desk by Monday, basically.
Okay.
So he starts the report off
That's a
with this letter.
stressful weekend.
I know. He's employee of the month, man.
For sure. I hope for the next quarter.
Wayne McConnell, man, he needs a plaque up permanently. So he says in his letter, he says, you tasked me to provide an assessment of the gateway experience in terms of its mechanics and ultimate practicality. As I set out to fulfill that tasking, it soon became clear that in order to assess the validity and practicality of the process, I needed to do enough supporting research and analysis to fully understand how and why the process works. Frankly, sir, that proved to be an extremely involved and difficult business. I had to be able to construct a scientifically valid and reasonably lucid model of how consciousness functions under the influence of the brain hemisphere synchronization technique employed by Gateway. And once this was done, the next step involved recourse to theoretical physics in order to explain the character of the time-space dimension and the means by which expanded human consciousness transcends it in achieving Gateway's objectives. Finally, I again found it necessary to use physics to bring the whole phenomenon of out-of-body states into the language of physical science, to remove the stigma of its occult connotations and put it in a frame of reference suited to objective assessment. So immediately he's like, I'm going to take this out-of-body stuff, I'm going to put it in science terms. And he goes right at it. He mentions in this part Niels Bohr, who was a renowned physicist, and he once responded to his son's complaints about the obtuse nature of certain concepts by saying, "You are not thinking, you are merely being logical." So to borrow his mode of expression, parts of this paper, McConnell notes, will require not only logic, but a touch of right brain intuitive insight to achieve a complete, comfortable grasp of the concepts involved. Nevertheless, once that is done, I'm confident that their construction and application will stand up to the test of rational critique. So he's saying, like, suspend your disbelief here for a minute. Listen to your intuition. I'm going to ask you to do the same, listeners. I'm going to ask you to do the same, Pat, because this, you'll see, he's not only, he's employee of the decade, man. He takes this project and this is only a 26-page report, but only like 3 or 4 pages deals with Gateway. The other like 21 or 22 pages is just like explaining reality, and we're going to get into it.
Okay. I'm digging this. I'm excited. Let's do this.
So he finishes his introductory letter, basically sounding like a guy who like caught a glimpse of something like miraculous that like he should not have seen. Um, and while he has to use occult language sometimes, he makes very clear this is a scientific endeavor, and he makes explicitly clear at later parts of the both in the introductory letter and also at the end of the report that he's like not trying to tear down people's religion and like beliefs. And in fact, the way he sees it, this basically fits into whatever your beliefs are anyway. Um, and we'll see what you think about that. I'm interested to hear what you hear about that.
Okay.
So we begin. Altered consciousness. He has to explain to this boss what altered consciousness is. And he begins by clearly stating that this is the Monroe Institute's techniques of hemispherical synchronization. And he goes on to explain like basic concepts. And so I thought I would include these. First of all, I've heard of all of these, but I've never heard like a scientific explanation of how they work. So I thought you might find it interesting. And so the three categories of like reprogramming your brain, as he puts it, is hypnosis, transcendental meditation, and biofeedback. And all of these apparently work scientifically due to the whole fact that our left and right brains it, are different. So,
Hmm.
for instance, number one, hypnosis. Hypnosis works by sedating your left brain. That's why they're like, you're getting very sleepy. It puts the logical side of your brain to sleep. And since the left brain acts as like a selector and does all the picking and choosing of what both sides are going to focus on, if you basically drowse the left side of the brain out through hypnosis, then like it's kind of like its security guard is drunk or something. It
Hmm.
starts letting things through the door, and the right brain just takes whatever goes through the door. So hypnosis distracts the left brain bodyguard basically, and then the right brain just takes whatever orders the hypnotist is giving it.
Okay.
So the lack of the left brain scrutiny opens up parts of your right brain's capabilities, since it's like the big ocean crazy part of your brain
Yeah.
that you might not have known. So for instance, when you hypnotize somebody, you might suggest your memory is better than you think it is. And this could actually lead the right brain into tapping into like unrecognized memories that you may be suppressed or that are very old, or the left brain just thinks is a waste of time. So this explains scientifically how people can like uncover repressed memories
Uh-huh.
or remember stuff that they think they forgot because it's all in that right brain. It's just you got to the left brain is just like we're not dealing with something that happened 20 years ago, but it's all in there. So that's how hypnosis gets through the bodyguard to like get to your old memories.
Okay.
But hypnosis can also be used physiologically. For instance, you can actually get past the left brain and tell your right brain physical stuff, such as your legs are very heavy, your right arm is numb. You can like, because there's this part that the right brain controls, it's called the homunculus. And that's the idea that different parts of your brain stimulate different parts of your body.
Hmm.
And the right brain communicates with that. So you can basically, this is how supposedly hypnotists can make you do things physically, is you can like put that suggestion in the right brain that will like control your body. But generally we're not talking about like stage hypnotists here. We're not talking about like goofy things. We're talking about like making someone feel like their limbs are numb or like they're very hot or they're very cold or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so number two is transcendental meditation. Um, Now, unlike hypnosis, this doesn't sedate the left brain. This one just bypasses it completely. So, a lot of Eastern religions use this. And the way this works is basically you have a prolonged, single minded concentration on things. And you focus on things like your breath and your heartbeat.
Yeah.
And you can essentially, by modifying your heartbeat and other things, you can move energy up your spinal cord, which is part of like what yoga is about. And this essentially, when you move that energy and you have your heart beating at certain rhythms and stuff, it creates acoustical sound waves that move up your spine and basically bypasses the logical part of your brain and just directly sends a sound wave signal to the right part of your brain. And so that's the theory of why that creates like altered consciousness and stuff like that. And it's very similar to what Monroe is trying to do with just direct sound waves, basically.
Okay.
And it creates like altered consciousness, as is reported in like Buddhism and Hinduism, etc. The third thing is biofeedback. And so biofeedback is maybe considered the most scientific. And this is actually using your left brain. This one is the only one that uses your left brain. And the way this works is you basically train your left brain to like slowly over time learn to like tell the right brain what to do to your homunculus.
Okay.
So the way this works is you like visualize a stimuli, which gives, and then you have to give the left brain something to measure it by. So he uses the example of, we all know that like if you have an injured limb, like my leg is injured, more blood flow will help it heal faster.
Mhm.
So let's say you wanted to control the amount of blood flow with your mind to a part of your body. He says this is actually possible. And the way you do this is basically you give the left brain something to focus on. So he says you could use a thermometer on your leg to tell, because your temperature would go up if you had more blood flow.
Mhm.
So he says basically put a thermometer on your leg and just focus intently on like more blood flow to the leg, more blood flow to the leg. And then eventually there will be more blood flow. Now it might be a coincidence, it might be, but what you're doing is you're training your left brain to see that reading on that thermometer and to remember that feeling. And then eventually, the more you do that, this whole memory impulse will allow you to remember what it feels like to have more blood flow, and then basically tell your right brain, hey, I need more blood flow there, with enough practice and time.
Okay.
Okay. So Hemisink kind of uses elements of all of these, but it does it through direct sound waves. So
far, it sounds the easiest. I'm gonna be honest with you.
yeah, well, none of these are easy. They take a lot of practice.
Oh, okay. Well, that's disappointing.
But okay, actually you're right though.
This does sound like just using sound waves sounds easier than these three things you just described, though. Well, maybe not hypnosis. I guess it's somebody else doing it to you, and so I don't know.
Yeah, but that's still hard. You can't control that. Well, I mean, maybe you can hypnotize yourself. I don't know. That probably makes no sense because you'd be using.
That's what I mean. You'd have to use somebody else, and so you're being directed by somebody else. So there's less control there, I guess.
So that's kind of why the CIA was interested in this, is it's a way to get there scientifically, because you can like measure radio waves and stuff like that, and to do it more repeatedly. Yeah, you don't need to be a yogi. You could just have the right technology, basically.
Yeah. Again, kind of, yeah, okay, so I stand by my statement. This sounds like the easiest way to do this.
Yeah, you're right. And I will achieve it.
Yes.
So
well, maybe I gotta let you finish this before I decide how I feel about it.
Okay. Well, this is so you probably will have a lot of feelings. So then we'll get back into the report. So McConnell says that fundamentally the gateway experience is a training system designed to bring enhanced strength, focus, and coherence to the amplitude and frequency of brainwave output between the left and right hemispheres, so as to alter our consciousness, moving it outside the physical sphere so as to ultimately escape the very restrictions of time and space. Imagine giving this guy this assignment and you get like 3 pages in and you're like, what?
Yeah.
So the research associates of the Monroe Institute report that in our studies of the effect of the Monroe tape system on brain waves, we found that the tapes encourage the focusing of brain energy into a narrower and narrower frequency band. Now remember that. This focusing of energy is not unlike the yoga concept of the pointedness, which can translate roughly into Western speak as single-mindedness. And this report goes on to state that to observe that as the individual gets into the tapes beyond what's called focus 3, there's like 20 levels of focus. There's a gradual increase in the brain wave size, which is a measure of brain energy or power. And they use the example here. I'm going to quit reading at this point and we'll move on. But they use the example of a lamp versus a laser. So have you ever seen like brainwave readings?
Yeah.
So what this does is it allows you to basically make those readings faster and faster because you're harmonizing the two sides of your brain. And so instead of being like beep beep beep, it's like beep 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 beep. It heightens the frequency, and they compare it as, like, they say your brain normally is kind of like a lamp. It has heat and light, and it just kind of expands all over the place. And this is like making your brain a laser.
Okay.
It's focusing it all on one frequency. And frequencies become a big part of the scientific part of this. So, to achieve synchronization, he says, of the brain's hemispheres, the Hemisink technique takes advantage of a phenomenon known as the frequency following response, which means that if a subject hears a sound produced at a frequency which emulates one of those associated with the operation of the human brain, the brain will naturally try to mimic that same frequency pattern by adjusting its brainwave output. And this is a recognized scientific phenomenon. Therefore, if the subject is in a fully awake state but hears sound frequencies which approximate the brainwave state of being asleep, you can actually make somebody suddenly very tired from fully awake by like playing them a frequency that's close to the brainwave of being asleep, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So if the human brain is exposed to one frequency in the left ear, which is 10 hertz below another audible frequency played in the right ear, rather than hearing either of the two audible frequencies, what the brain does is it chooses to hear the difference between them, or the quote beat frequency, which is why this is called binaural beats, thus availing itself of the FFR phenomenon and using the technique of beat frequencies. The objective is to relax the left hemisphere of the brain, place the physical body in a virtual sleep state, and bring the left and right hemispheres into coherence under conditions designed to promote the production of ever higher amplitude and frequency of the brainwave output. In this way, Gateway endeavors to provide the subject with the tools which he may alter his consciousness based on his own volition over time through the repetitive use of the tapes, so as to access via intuitive means new categories of information not available to ordinary consciousness. It took me a while to understand this. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, you can go ahead and explain that because there was a lot. There was a lot to everything you just said.
Okay, so basically, yeah, it took me a while. I had to sit and think about it. So, but here's what I came up with. So, basically, we know that if you play a frequency that's close to a brain frequency, your brain will try to mimic it. So, if you play one that's close to the hertz level of being sleepy, it can make a fully awake person feel asleep because your brain's going to naturally try to mimic that frequency, right?
Okay.
So that's like the first thing you need to know. Now, the second thing, the binaural, which just means two ears, is basically how you get the full brain to hear one frequency. And that's that you basically pick two frequencies where the difference between them is what's called the theta, or like the sleepy frequency.
Mm-hmm.
You play them in either ear, and what the brain communicating with itself will do is it will try to create that third sound, which is the difference. So you can't just play the theta frequency. You have to play like 10 megahertz above and 10 megahertz below on each ear, and essentially you can pick which frequency that you want to force the brain into, because when it hears two different things, it will always try to collapse it into the difference between the two.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so that's the basics. That's how you do it. you figure out what frequency you want the brain to be in, and then you choose two sounds where the middle is that frequency, and you play it in both ears, and then the brain, the two sides communicate, figure out the difference, and that's how you get them synced up.
Okay.
So at this point, so he's basically explained like how this works, but he hasn't gotten into like like, okay, so I put the brain in a frequency, I'm sleepy. What's the big deal? Okay,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I didn't want to sound silly, but that's all I've heard so far.
At what point do I escape time and space?
Although this does sound great for like going to sleep, like I'm kind of curious about this part for like at night.
It's been pretty much proven to work for that.
Oh, well, then I'm definitely going to figure this out, yeah.
Okay, so it definitely helps. So this is the part he warned his boss about. He's like, pretty much to explain why this is a big deal, I have to get into consciousness and energy and explain some things to you.
Okay.
So we begin, McConnell goes on a brief break to explain what consciousness is, okay? But in order to get there, he has to start with matter and energy, the two things that like make up everything. So he starts with the scientific principle that electrons and in fact the nucleus of atoms aren't physical in the way we think about them. They're actually made up of oscillating energy.
Okay, yeah.
And that means basically matter and energy are the same thing.
Okay.
Because if matter is made of energy, then it's just all energy.
Yeah.
Now, this means, at subatomic levels, it's like, okay, but this means that since everything that we think of as physical is made up of oscillating energy, our cells, the human brain, everything is just this extraordinary manifestation of energy, basically. And that we can actually measure what frequency those things vibrate at. And this is true. If you go and you read the actual report, like he lists the scientific, he's like, here's how much a cell is. It's 10 to the third power. Here's how much an atom is. He like gets into like what level everything's vibrating at.
Okay.
And I'm like, I had to leave. I left that out of the show for obvious reasons. I'm not gonna sit here and spout numbers, but this is like documented. So here's the next thing. So he just explained that everything's energy. The next thing you got to get in your head is that we are all in a hologram.
Whoa.
Okay.
We just made a leap.
And this is a theory that actually kind of got popular the last couple decades too, is the idea of like the holographic universe. He was on this like early.
Okay.
So he explains basically how powerful and amazing holograms are, which is true. This is like, maybe someday we'll do like a hologram, or I'm sure we'll talk about holograms, but I want to do a human brain episode. I don't know, I have a million episodes, but he goes into like this explanation of how cool holograms are. And I went ahead and did like some extra research and stuff. And the big thing about hologram means the whole picture.
Yeah.
By the way. Is that they encode information not only extremely efficiently, but also in like very odd ways. So like this is a segment from a science article. It says, consider that you've just taken a photo of a scene. You've taken your camera, pointed, click, and captured some information. From an optics point of view to your eye, you've stored some time-averaged amplitude of the light field emanating from that scene using some form of sensor in different red, green, and blue channels. As a result, a vast amount of information within the light field has been thrown away, like ultraviolet, etc. Collecting just this information is effectively capturing only a tiny percentage of what was actually there. A hologram, invented in 1947 by Dennis Gabor, is, in its most basic sense, is the recording, then reconstruction of all of the light field information, such as that when it was viewed. The observer is unable to tell the difference from the original scene because the hologram is giving the observer all of the additional information. So there's a lot of fake holograms. There's like hologram music performances and stuff, because we kind of like pop culture think of holograms as like, oh, it's like a light picture, but like that's not
Yeah.
what a real hologram is. A holograph is like a complete capture of everything in that specific moment of time, and in fact, over time. Now, another feature McConnell notes of a hologram is its efficiency. Billions of bits of information can be stored in a very tiny space, and the pattern of the holographic photograph is stored everywhere on the plate. I'm not sure if you're aware. The bottom line. Have you ever heard that one piece of a hologram actually contains the whole hologram?
No.
Yeah. So that's one thing, and I don't know why. I'm sure there's some mathematical explanation, but if you have an actual hologram and you cut it in half, both halves will actually contain all the information from the other half. And you
Huh.
could just keep cutting it down and cutting it down, and it does get lower resolution, but you can cut it down to 1/1000th of the hologram, and it will contain some resolution level of the entire thing you cut it apart from.
Oh, okay.
So the bottom
There's a lot
line,
more to holograms than I think I was aware of, to be honest
Google,
with you.
Google it, man. It's crazy. Holograms are crazy. It makes no sense.
Because I think I just had like the pop culture awareness of what a hologram is, like Tupac at Coachella or Princess Leia
Yeah,
asking
exactly.
Obi-Wan for help. Like I just thought, yeah, it was a light thing, basically.
No, it's the whole image.
Huh.
This is the created in the 47. It's crazy. Yeah, definitely. I encourage everyone to read into this if they're into like sciencey math stuff. So the bottom line for McConnell is that we've already established everything is energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what we think of as a 3D world is actually a gigantic hologram of the energy field.
Okay.
It's just this unimaginably huge, complex hologram.
All right.
Okay, so he states that
Ooh,
according,
we made
go
a
ahead.
big leap here.
Oh,
This,
we've just begun on the leaps, my friend.
okay, okay. Well, I'm not gonna get bogged down too far in this then.
We've just begun. Everything's energy, and I should say this, what we experience as 3D reality is a hologram.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
I'm just thinking about that as what you just told me about holograms, about the little piece inside of the little, like it represents all of it. I'm like, so are you about to tell me the universe is in all of us, Dennis?
Kind of. Yeah. A little bit. And we are, yeah, pretty much. A like rendered down representation of the universe, basically.
Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah, So
That's a weird thing to wrap your head around. It's just like, okay, all right, I go with you.
all right, so back to McConnell. He says in the report, according to theories of neuroscientists from Stanford University and physicists from the University of London, the human mind is itself a hologram, which attunes itself to the universal hologram by the medium of energy exchanges, thereby deducing meaning and achieving the state which we call consciousness.
I feel like this dude took some drugs at some point during this report and just wow, that's whew, that was a mouthful you just said there.
He kind of explains how this works. So basically, without getting too into the scientific stuff, mumbo jumbo, not really mumbo jumbo, but um, essentially our minds, okay, essentially there's this universal energy field, okay? We've already established that.
Yeah,
Our minds are like a small version of that.
yeah.
So, and that's what makes a mind, but what makes a mind unique basically is that when I look at something, so when I look at I'll go back to the cat. When I look at a cat, what the mind, not the brain, the mind and brain are two different things. What the mind does is it essentially cross checks what I'm seeing with the like the full thing in my mind. It's
Yeah,
constantly comparing, and that's what we call consciousness, is being able to like cross check reality versus itself, basically.
yeah, comparing cats that you've seen, basically, to is this a cat?
Yeah, that's a way of thinking about it. But it's kind of more like I am this miniature version image of the universe, and I'm cross checking it against like the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
So like I'm like it's really just like moment by moment experiencing reality, which is what we know as consciousness. So he says when you're doing that to make sense of the holographic image, um, then to make sense of the holographic image, what the holographic image that you're looking at is saying to your mind, the mind proceeds to compare the image just received with itself. Specifically, it does this by comparing the image received with the part of its own hologram that constitutes memory, and by registering differences in geometric form and in energy frequency, the consciousness perceives. So you pretty much got it. I see a cat. It says like, where have I seen this before? Where does it check out in my miniature version of the hologram? And then that's thinking. That's what thinking is. And like only a mind does that. A mind is like everything's a part of the hologram, but only a mind is like kind of like its own hologram.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So McConnell says, contrary to what everyone knows is so, it may not be the brain that produces consciousness, but rather consciousness that creates the appearance of the brain.
Okay.
And I kind of think that a little bit. I don't know. I think if we have to put, I think it's all the same thing, but if we have to put one before the other, like I kind of like this idea that we're basically producing this reality by like constantly cross-checking with it.
Yeah.
Any questions so far?
I mean, no.
We're getting there. Yeah, we're gonna okay. So
Like,
we'll keep
I
going.
understand what you're telling me. I'm just not sure what to make of all of it yet.
Okay, yeah, we'll keep putting it together. He keeps building and building and building here.
Like, I'm
So
following you. I'm just trying not to get bogged down in any one of these ideas, because I know it's building to something bigger.
right. All right. So some scientists, he notes, suspect that the human mind operates as a simple binary go or no go system, as do digital computers. Therefore, once it superimposes a three-dimensional matrix over holographic information it wishes to interpret and reduces that information mathematically to two-dimensional form, it can completely process it using its fundamental binary system, just as any computer made by the hands of man processes volumes of data and makes various comparisons between the data and information stored in its memory. Our minds operate in the same way, perceiving by comparison only. We put the proposition this way. Our whole reality is constructed by constantly making comparisons. Whether we perceive something, we always perceive differences only. In states of expanded consciousness, the right hemisphere of the human brain is in its holistic, nonlinear, nonverbal mode of functioning and acts as the primary matrix or receptor for this holographic input. While by operating in the phase or coherence with the right brain, the left hemisphere provides the secondary matrix through its binary computer like method of functioning to screen further the data by comparison to reduce it to a discrete two-dimensional form. So the right brain, again, just takes everything in as this ocean, this big river, and the left brain tries to do its work of like processing it. Now, essentially, the way we normally operate is the left brain is like telling the right brain what to do. When you get into this altered state of mind, it's flipped. It's like you're in this stream. You're in this like totally non-discrete emotional right brain crazy thing, and then like the left brain is kind of doing like side duty. It's like, okay, that's a person, okay, that's, you see what I'm saying, instead of it being the other way around.
Yeah.
So the gateway, says McConnell, succeeds in bringing about a refinement and energy matrix of the mind. It succeeds in expanding or altering human consciousness so that it can perceive without resource to the intercession of the physical senses, such that ever more of the universal hologram can ultimately be perceived and understood. Merrill Ferguson has written that the theories of Pribram and Bohm, the scientists at those respective universities earlier, appear to account for all transcendental experience, paranormal events, and even normal perceptual oddities. She goes on to say that currently these ideas being proposed are startling, all-encompassing model that's generating considerable excitement among those intrigued by the mysteries of human consciousness. The holographic model marries brain research to theoretical physics. It accounts for normal perception and simultaneously takes the paranormal and transcendental experiences out of the supernatural by explaining them as part of nature. Yeah, so you just turn off your senses. You're just operating, all your senses do. I've thought this before. I've kind of like sat in bed and like when your mind wanders, I've thought this before. I've been like when you look at something with your eyes, the whole process of looking at something is really about its limitations. Because you're only seeing like red, green, yellow, blue. You're not seeing the expansiveness. Same with sound. You can't hear the whole frequencies of every sound. All of our senses are designed to take this big ocean of information and like categorize it, define it into like certain subsets and limit what we're seeing. And that's what we think of perception. So when you bypass that to the right brain, you get outside the eyes, you start seeing solely with this holographic mind that can just experience the whole thing at once. So to complete our outline of the process by which the minds achieve and exercises consciousness, we must also describe the mechanism which accounts for the aspect of human thought that differentiates that from the consciousness of plants or animals, and this is self-cognition. Humans not only know, but they know that they know. They're able to monitor the process of their own thinking and maintain an awareness of it. Moreover, they can conduct a comparative assessment, evaluating the functioning of their thought process against various objective standards that they have adopted. Human consciousness can do this because it has the capacity to duplicate aspects of its own hologram, project them out, perceive that projection, put it through comparison with the memory aspect where it's evaluated with standards of measure are stored, and its own holograms and measures of the sense and sense the difference. And that kind of makes sense to me the more I think about it, that we're constantly cross-checking ourselves. We're constantly thinking about thinking.
Yeah. Oh boy, do I know about that.
Oh yeah. Okay, so he's just explained the human mind. Everything's energy. The physical world is a hologram. Our brain is like its own hologram, and it's constantly cross-checking itself against the big hologram.
Now to explain escaping time and space.
Yes, exactly.
Now that we all understand it's a big hologram and just a construct that our mind has created because we are that big hologram, just a mini hologram of it that we cross-check all the time. And everything's in us, so we are connected to all of it and could access all of it, is what I'm taking away from this so far.
You're making good. You're making good. Yeah. So now that he's done the little thing of explaining that,
all right,
to his boss, who has to be just loving it. I just keep imagining a guy reading this report like, what?
We promoted this guy.
Yeah. So now we're going to talk about what time and space are, because you have to understand that to know how you can use this holographic stuff to get outside of it.
Okay.
And he actually, I love it. At this part, when you get to this part of the report, he starts it off by saying, "Now the fun begins."
I mean, when your government report has "now the fun begins" in it, we're at the top of the roller coaster right now. Like, it felt like we were on some ups and downs there with what you've done with me. Really, that was just the ratchet up.
Yeah, that was exactly. That was
now
just
we're ready for the first big drop.
Physics defines time as a measurement of energy or force in motion.
Yes.
Okay.
I agree with you.
But for something to be in motion, it actually needs limitation. And that limitation is what we call space.
Okay.
If there was no limitation, just to explain this, and he goes, this is just my summary. If there was no limitation on energy, it would just be infinity. It would just be uniformly spread out. And in infinity, there's no here, there's no there, there's no location, there's nothing to move because there's nowhere to go, because there's nothing beyond infinity, there's no beginning, there's no end. Everything's just completely one.
Okay.
Now, McConnell says this is called the absolute, and it does exist, and it is conscious.
Okay.
It's basically God. He says God is the absolute energy field.
Okay, I was kind of wondering. I'm like, okay, so is this like gonna kind of spit into the explanation for what there was before creation?
He does get into the Big Bang, and it was so that I just briefly touch on it.
Okay,
but what there was the absolute.
Okay.
This infinite conscious energy.
Okay.
So McConnell notes, and he doesn't call it God, by the way, that's just my word. McConnell notes that this absolute does exist, and there are various dimensions between it and our physical universe, which is in constant motion. And because the absolute is absolute, it necessarily not only exists in its own dimension, but it also exists everywhere, including right here, right now.
Okay.
Okay. So to enter these intervening dimensions between us and the absolute, he says human consciousness must focus with such intense coherence that the frequency of the energy pattern which comprises our consciousness, the brainwave output, can accelerate to the point where the resulting frequency pattern, if displayed on a measuring machine for brainwaves, would look virtually like a solid line. Achievement of this state of altered consciousness sets the stage for perception of non-time-space dimensions because of the operation of a principle in physics known as Planck's distance. So do you remember when I asked you if you knew about like brain waves and how they go beep, beep, beep or whatever?
Yes.
It's very important that we use these audio waves to ramp our brain waves up to the point where it's like basically a flat line.
Okay.
And that's important due to a thing called Planck's distance. Now, Max Planck, very famous, very accomplished physicist and mathematician from the early part. He was Einstein's contemporary. Okay. He's the E equals mc squared. See how it's the speed of light? Mm-hmm. That's Planck's constant. He figured that out. Planck figured out the speed of light.
Okay. I did not know that, I don't think.
Yeah, Max Planck's a really interesting dude. He suggested in 1899 that there had to be fundamental natural units for length, mass, time, and energy. He derived using dimensional analysis. He then derived these using dimensional analysis, using only the Newton gravitational constant, the speed of light, and the unit of action, which later became known as the Planck constant. The natural units he further derived became known as Planck length, Planck mass, Planck time, and Planck energy. This is like, if you geek out on this stuff, like look up Planck length, Planck mass, look up stuff about Max Planck, because he basically figured out using nothing but math starting with gravity. He's like, okay, so we know that gravity is this. He used that to figure out what the smallest possible thing in the universe to be, what the shortest length of time can be, what the smallest amount of energy can be. He basically figured out that like we are not, when you think classically about speed, you're like, well, you could go anywhere from 0 up to, he's figured out what the smallest units are. You can't keep cutting reality down infinitely. It has a point, and that's Planck length. Okay.
Okay.
Our universe is just like a computer screen. That's how you think about, like, when you look at a computer screen, it might look seamless, but somewhere down there's a dot.
Yeah.
He figured out what the dot is for reality.
Okay.
And he figured that out for time, length, energy, all this stuff. He figured out what all the smallest units are. Now, the Planck distance is essentially the smallest possible distance in the physical universe. And we know how big it is. It's 10 to the negative 33 centimeters. So it's a 1 with 33 zeros after its centimeters. Negative.
Okay.
So if you took a centimeter, cut it up, 1 0 0 0 0 0, you would get a Planck length. It's insanely small. I mean, this has to be smaller than atoms. Anything you can think of, it's smaller than. Okay. So below these Planck constants, below this like Planck length, if something goes smaller than that, it basically blinks out of existence.
Okay.
Because you've like crossed the barrier. You've gone through the pixels, basically. You've somehow gotten so small that you can go through the pixels on the computer screen, and you've exited the screen. You're now in whatever's behind it.
Okay.
And this applies to everything. This is just as accepted in science as the speed of light. Okay. That's the great thing. That's the great thing about what McConnell is doing here, is he's like really trying hard to find like very accepted things to like put this into. Okay. So this is actually what's theorized to happen when subatomic particles become entangled. This is something that Einstein called spooky action at a distance. It's also called quantum entanglement. And that's a thing that we've measured at different places. I believe at like CERN and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It happens when you collide two particles together and they somehow become entangled in a way where no matter what distance you put between them, if you do something to one, it also affects the other instantaneously.
I think we touched on it briefly in the CERN Large Hadron Collider episode that we did. I didn't go into this real heavily, but I think we did talk about it a little bit.
It's something
stuff they were doing.
Yeah, it's weird, and it basically it basically violates Einstein's theory of relativity, because his theory says nothing can move faster than the speed of light. And if something is affecting these two things instantaneously, that's faster than the speed of light.
Yeah.
We know what happens. We know it violates Einstein's laws. We don't know why.
Yeah.
So basically the theory is that the reason that works is because the two particles communicate when they blink out of what we call reality. And we know that subatomic particles can do this. They can like blink in and out of existence, basically. So he's saying that what's happening is it's not faster than light communication. They're blinking out of reality into the absolute. Because when you exit this, you go back into that big energy plane where there is no space, there is no time, and you can communicate instantaneously. And he's saying that this idea of the absolute and the energy field explains the spooky action at a distance. It's kind of like, for instance, if you're playing like Sim City, I can make two things happen across the town happen at the same time. And if you lived in Sim City, you'd be like, "What's good? That's impossible. Nothing can happen. Nothing can happen instantaneously at that distance, right? That violates the speed of light." But it's like I'm outside of the program, so it's like something outside the program's exerting influence that we see as like a violation of physics, and that's when they blink out into the. Okay, so here we go. We basically got there. Let's put all this together. So the theory goes that since this applies to everything, that if we can use these brain methods and this hemisync to raise the frequency of your brain to the point to where the difference is less than 10 to the negative 33 centimeters, then the human consciousness, like the particles, will click out of existence and join these intermediary dimensions between us and like the absolute.
Just go out into the infinity.
Yep.
Oh.
Because if your brain is these frequencies of the hologram, and if the way we measure it is these frequencies, if you can get that line fast enough where instead of beep, 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 it's beep. If it gets fast enough, it will go below the Planck constant, and you have, boom, you've exited time and space.
Okay.
All right.
That just scares me on like, okay, well, could you get lost and not come back? Like, could your consciousness leave and not return?
I don't know. I've wondered that as well.
Is that what a brain aneurysm is?
I don't know, man. I don't know. But there appears to be, and this is just my interpretation. That appears to maybe not. I don't know. Maybe it is possible. Actually, I'm not going to speculate because. Okay, so anyway, McConnell
still going to try it. Don't get me wrong. Like so far, you have sold me on this idea more than talked me out of it.
Oh yeah.
Coming back is a risk. I think I'm going to have to take.
So do you want to know what these other dimensions are like?
Yes. Well, okay. Yes. I guess I do want to know where I'm going before I officially book this trip.
So the odds are, now the idea is that you can actually work your way up to the absolute.
Okay.
But in between, you basically have gradients between infinity and where we're at now.
Okay.
So
is this where the remote viewing comes in?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because what happens is, as McConnell says, the causal relationship between events breaks down. Movements become jerky rather than smooth. Time and space become grainy or chunky. Perhaps a piece of space can be traversed by a particle of matter in any direction without necessarily being synchronized with a piece in time. In short, a pair of events will occur in either time or space, the pair not being connected causally, but by a random fluctuation. Inside the dimension of time-space, where both concepts apply in a generally uniform way, there's a proportional relationship between them, and that's where we exist. The relationship is neat and predictable, but as you go up, I guess I'll call it higher towards infinite, that relationship just starts breaking down. We're at the part of this universe where basically things are the most chaotic, everything's moving all at once, and we have the most limits. So like we're in this bubbling pot, so like we have space to limit things, we have time to define things by. You just basically, as you start moving up towards the infinite, just that starts to break down.
Okay.
It just gets fuzzier and fuzzier and fuzzier. Things are happening for no causal reason. This time is there, that time's there, this place is there. Something will happen in space, but not in time. It starts to work its way gradually towards this infinite just expanse. And when you're in those, that's how you can like take a trip to Mars or take a trip, because all of time and space is there, but it's also out of whack, right?
Yeah.
So that's why sometimes the remote viewers don't get things right, or they see things in shadows, or one detail might be off. It's because they're in this, they've like broke the code. They're like in this broken version of the software basically, and it's like they can go anywhere, but it's like kind of corrupted, and it's all moving towards mesh the higher up you get.
Yeah.
So you really don't want to go all, it sounds like you want to like skim the surface, maybe go like one dimension higher where things kind of don't make sense. And like maybe there's some weird stuff like time goes backwards randomly every once in a while, but
you can move around more freely, but there's still construct to it.
Yeah, you want to stay you want to stay close to home, I assume. But I mean, that doesn't stop people from trying to go all the way, right?
Oh, I'm sure.
So at this point, he gets into like the shape of the universe, how the Big Bang fits into this, and it's very complicated, very esoteric. Basically, the main takeaway is that we're essentially living in this dimension where there's the most movement, most chaos, but the universal hologram, everything's essentially simultaneous, which means when humans click out, we can travel literally anywhere or anytime, and sometimes it's the same thing because it will always be there. It's like pausing the Sim City in the middle of a glitch, and et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so McConnell goes on. When consciousness reaches a state of sophistication in which it can perceive itself, its own hologram, it reaches the point of self-cognition. Human beings have this form of elevated consciousness, as does the absolute. But in the case of the latter, the absolute, it is a function of energy, and its associated quality of consciousness is infinite, which means it's omniscience, omnipotence. It's everything you think of God as. Like, that's what the absolute is. When energy returns to a state of total rest within the absolute, when energy returns to a state of total rest within the absolute, it returns to the continuum of consciousness in a pool of limitless, timeless perception that resides there. We're getting into what happens when you die, Patrick.
Okay.
He's just shot right past. I'm going straight through the report. He has not even gotten to the point yet where he's like, here's how we use this. He's gone straight to what happens when you die. So when you return to the one or the absolute, you're in this limitless bounds, basically. Thus, the more complex an energy system in the material state, the more consciousness it possesses and maintains in its reality. Our consciousness, therefore, is that differentiated aspect of the universal consciousness which resides within the absolute. It accounts for the organization of the energy patterns which constitute our physical body, but is distinctly separate from and superior to it. It's basically our soul. It's like the blueprint for us that creates our body through its own like recognition of stuff in the hologram. Like, so yeah. Since consciousness exists quite apart from and outside of reality, beyond the bounds of time and space, it, like the absolute, has neither a beginning nor end. Reality has both a beginning and end because it is bounded within time and space. But the fundamental quantum of energy and its associated consciousness is eternal. When reality ends, its constituent energy simply returns to the infinity in the absolute.
All right then.
Yep. So when you die, you just go to the absolute. Do you want to know what that's like? Because now he gets into what that's like.
I mean, I would like to know. Man, this is a lot to unpack. Like normally I would have a lot more to say through an episode, but I'm processing hard.
Yeah.
This is a lot to take in.
It is a lot. I thought about making it 2 parts, but I'm like, no, we're doing it, man. We're going.
I don't know if that would have made it better. As far as like understanding,
it
like,
probably would have made it worse.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because then there would have been a space in the stream of thought.
All right, so we'll wrap up with my final. We're gonna get into what
We're gonna end on what it's like when you die.
Yeah.
All right.
Having ascertained that human consciousness is able to separate from physical reality and interact with other intelligences and other dimensions within the universe, and that it is both eternal and destined for ultimate return to the absolute, we are faced with the question, so what happens then? Since memory is a function of consciousness and therefore enjoys the same eternal character as the consciousness, which accounts for its existence, it must be admitted that when consciousness returns to the absolute, it brings with it all of the memories it has accumulated throughout its experiences in reality. So good news, you don't just become part of a big ball of energy. You get to you keep yourself, basically.
Yeah, you keep your identity and your memories and what makes you you, essentially, it sounds like.
Right. The return of consciousness to the absolute does not imply an extinction of the separate entity which the consciousness organized and sustained in reality. Rather, it suggests a differentiated consciousness which merges with and participates in the universal consciousness and infinity of the absolute, without losing the separate identity and accumulated self-knowledge which its memories confer upon it. So you become like, you enter into like communion with the absolute, but you're still you. You're like part of each other, basically.
Yeah.
But, and this is kind of freaky, what it does lose is the capability for generation of independent thought holograms, since that can only be done by energy and motion in reality. In other words, you retain the power to perceive, but you lose the power of will or choice. In exchange, however, this consciousness participates in the all-knowing, infinite continuum of consciousness, which is a characteristic of energy in the ever-present. Consequently, it is accurate to observe that when a person experiences the out-of-body state, he is in fact projecting that eternal spark of consciousness and memory which constitutes the ultimate source of his identity, to let it play in and learn from dimensions both inside and outside the time-space world, in which his physical component currently enjoys a short period of reality.
Whew. All right. So you get to go play and kind of make decisions still in this place that you're going to go eventually and not be able to do anything. But
Yeah,
you're going to
right
know
now,
everything.
it really to me fits in with Christianity in a way.
Kind of.
In a way. Go ahead, yeah.
No, I mean, you can make some leaps there that is the being in constant communion with God forever afterwards, as he is that infinite, and so you are therefore connected to it.
Right, being part of like the same thing, calling him the absolute, like that's weird. But
Or
like
the absolute, yeah.
I think it's interesting, however, that after you exit the physical realm, basically, you maintain your. Here's what I was thinking: you maintain yourself, but you basically lose your ability to make decisions. So it's kind of like you're stuck with yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of made me think of heaven and hell a little bit.
Yeah, I see where you're going with that. Yeah.
Because if you're like aligned with the all or whatever, then you're going to be like having a great time. But if like you don't like that, you're going to be just like trapped in something you don't like, and you would have created that yourself by making your hologram mind that, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like there's this there was I think it was an Eastern Orthodox priest who said that he believes that heaven and hell are the same place. The difference is the people who are in hell like can't take it. They're like, this is horrible. I can't take, you know how some people just like have a horrible time seeing other people happy, or they, you know, it's like you've made yourself in this finite life such a
Heaven
cockroach.
is their own personal hell.
Yeah, it's like you're just in the same place. But for somebody who's like aligned themselves with like good things, you're going to be like enjoying that and enjoying the consequences of all your decisions here. But for somebody who has spent time molding themselves into something that like despises good things, you could be in the same place, and that will basically be hell for you.
Oh.
And so I just thought that was an interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know. It made me think of that. I don't remember where I heard that. But so anyway, so after explaining the meaning of life, no big deal. McConnell at this point goes ahead and sets his sights on how the military can use this. It's all the same stuff. We can travel to the future. We can remote view. And basically, I'm not here to give a meditation lesson, so I'm leaving it there. I thought that was the most interesting part. If you want to know how to do it, if you want to know how it could be used, we're including links to the report. We're including links to the Vice article. And also I've included a link to the Monroe Institute, who still does classes. They do online classes. They also do, Patrick, a 1-week retreat.
Really?
Where you can go, all meals and lodging provided, and you can
What
do
is the price tag on that? Did you
I don't.
look?
It didn't say. I bet
Ooh,
you have to email them.
it's probably pricey then.
It's probably pretty
It's
pricey.
probably pretty pricey. They don't want everybody being able to do this.
How do you put a price on like
That's true.
exploring reality though? I mean, and you only have a short amount of time to do it. Eventually you die, you know, and you end up in the absolute
Yeah.
excuse me.
Ooh, yeah, I'm gonna be clicking through these links for sure and probably trying to use some of these sound frequencies.
I didn't include any
Oh,
binaural beats.
I'll find them.
Yeah.
I'll find them.
Yeah, I'm thinking about using one tonight when I go to bed just to start slow.
Yeah, just slowly start getting your frequencies lined up.
You know, Whitley Strieber, who we've never done an episode on, he wrote Communion and a bunch of other books. Very famous. It's where the image of the gray basically comes from. Very famous alien abductee. Of course, he doesn't call them aliens now, and I don't think he ever did. He claims that he's still in contact with these beings, which are basically interdimensional. And he
So what does
claims
he
that they
call
have
them?
I think visitors
Okay.
or something like that.
So what does he claim?
He says that they have told him that, and this is reminding me, I've wanted to do a Whitley Strieber episode for a while. I'd love to interview the man, but it'll probably be a while off. He says the visitors have told him what it's like to be them, and it sounds like they're in one of these in between dimensions. They essentially don't have, I think we've talked about this on another episode, they don't have experience of, they don't have control over like physical reality the way we do. They can't change things. They're essentially, they describe it as being like a spectator, and that they are actually, he believes the abduction phenomenon is an attempt for them to share their knowledge with us, and for us to basically let them piggyback on our ability to experience new things.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. But anyway, I had that.
I thought
That
you were
was just
gonna
an
take it to
offhand.
a soul stealing episode there, what they were gonna try and that was what their angle was.
He says people accuse him of being League and demons. I mean, that's one interpretation of what he's saying. I mean, he says that's simplistic. They're not, it's not demon, but like, but it is what we touched on the soul stealing episode. The idea that they want to somehow take this thing we have, which whether you look at it scientifically or biblically or whatever, our superpower. We think of this stuff like getting into other dimensions and stuff as a superpower, but for things in that dimension, our real superpower is being able to like pick up a thing, set it down, it's going to be there when we come back, we can build a house, you know what I mean? Like we have this amazing superpower of like affecting reality in like a predictable way, and they don't necessarily have that. So like our limitation,
which that's just
is like
weird
what
to think about in itself, that they're like everything's just like flying around them in some way and they can't really harness things. I don't know. That's a lot to take. There's been a lot to just take in this episode.
Yeah. Anyway, well, I'm done pontificating. I hope you enjoyed. I hope the listeners enjoyed. I want to thank you all for listening. Like, share, subscribe. If you want more content, man, like our stuff, share it. And like we'll start putting out more stuff. I appreciate it. I love you all, and I love you, Patrick.
I love you too. Bye, everybody.
Bye.